Hey guys, welcome back to Worst Case Macchiato. Here we are with episode 2. We're gonna do two different cases today. I'm gonna do one and then Madison's gonna do one. My case is really small. I don't know if you want me to go first or...
Yeah, maybe you can go first. I think there's going to be a lot of dialogue with the case that I'm covering today, so if you want to go ahead.
Perfect. That's what I was thinking too, because my notes aren't very long for it. But obviously, like, we caught up in the first episode, we're doing this on the same day, so it's not like we have anything new to share. The case that I'm going to cover is the case that I like to call the Land Before Time murder, mostly because the little girl who played Ducky, or voiced Ducky in the series, was murdered. So I just call it the Land Before Time murder. So on June 6th, 1978, so your birthday in 1978.
Shout out.
So she is
Shout
a
out.
Gemini. Judith
Babies.
Barsi was born to her parents Maria and Joseph. Her parents were Hungarian immigrants. They fled from Hungary during the Soviet takeover in that started in the 1950s, and they emigrated to LA shortly before Judith was born. While they were living in LA, Maria, which is the mother, she hoped that Judith would become an actress because growing up she tried to become one and she just couldn't get off the ground. So she was hoping that Judith would kind of follow in those footsteps, and being in LA, there's going to be a lot more opportunities out there for her. And that dream of Maria's kind of like came to life when Judith was only 5 years old. An agent discovered Judith while they were at a skating rink, and she looked extremely young. Even though she was only 5, they thought that maybe she was like 3 because she was very small. So from that moment forward, Judith went on to appear in over 70 commercials and appeared in multiple films. And then, like I said before, she voice acted as the character Ducky in the Land Before Times movie series. I assume that you know what Land Before Time is, Madison?
I do. We didn't watch it as much as like you guys. I know that you guys were pretty obsessed with that show, but we didn't watch it too much on our end. But
Yeah,
I
so like
definitely know the Land Before Time movies
she
and
played
shows.
she played the little yellow bipedal dinosaur in the Land Before Time, and it's just such a cute character. But because she was so small in stature, kind of like I said, she often played roles of characters that were way younger than her. So even when she was like 10, she was playing children who were like 5 or 6, just because of how small she was. But as she was getting older, her parents started giving her growth stimulants so that she could start to appear as more her age. But by the time that Judith was in grade 4, so she was like 11, roughly around 11 years old, she was making 100,000 a year, which in 1978 in the 80s and stuff like that, that is now considered $780,000 today.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
so she
crazy.
was making just short of $1 million today by the time she was 10 or 11, which this allowed the parents to get a 3-bedroom home in West Hills, Los Angeles. And as she became more and more famous, her father Joseph, who was an alcoholic and was an unemployed plumber, it was noted that he became more and more abusive as the time went on, and he was super paranoid about their family unity. He often mentally abused Judith, and one time when his paranoia was kind of like at a peak, he believed that Maria was going to take Judith and leave him forever and never come back. He held up a knife to Judith's throat to kind of force them to stay home a lot of the time. Also, because of his paranoia, he had their house in West Hills surrounded by super tall fences, so nobody could get in, nobody could take photographs of the house, or anything like that. No news people could be on their lawn, or anything like that. And the gate for the huge tall fence was only able to be opened from the inside, so there would have to be someone home at all times, which usually Joseph was home because he was unemployed. But eventually, due to all the abuse and being kind of forced to stay home all the time with her father, she broke down one day to her agent about everything, and her agent took her to a child psychologist who identified very quickly that there was severe mental, physical, and emotional abuse going on in that household, from Joseph to both Judith and the mother. Like any good psychologist does, they reported it to the police and they reported CPS. but unfortunately nothing came of it because Maria refused to ever press charges anytime CPS or the police would come to the house. Obviously, it's a lot harder when you're in that situation, but if I had a child and, my partner was hurting them, I wouldn't like not press charges if CPS and police were there. But maybe, like, obviously when you're in that situation, everyone says it's very difficult because you're kind of glued to that person. But the problem I have with it is that Maria actually rented a secret apartment for her and Judith as a daytime getaway from Joseph, and if she went to the extent of paying an additional, like, for an additional place to rent so that they could not get abused for a day, like, I think like that, like, I'm surprised that she wouldn't go further to press charges against him. And I
Yeah.
just like it just like it frustrates me a little because I just like, you knew that he was such a big threat that you had to get a separate place from them and not tell him about it. um but when anyone was called, you wouldn't allow them to press charges or to go forward with anything. On July 27th in 1988, the firefighters were called to the Barsi house because the neighbors reported the house being on fire. Once the fire was dealt with and there was, yeah, and they extinguished it, the bodies of Judith and Maria were both found on the second floor, while Joseph's body was found in the garage. And the autopsy revealed that the fire was set post-mortem, so they were killed before the house was even set on fire, which is how they know that it was a homicide and not just a case of arson. So this is what police believed happened, because obviously they can't ask anybody because all three of the parties were dead. But what they assume is that either on July 25th or 26th, because they couldn't do an exact date of death because of how badly they were charred, but on either July 25th or 26th, Joseph realized that Maria was going to leave him, and then this threw him into a fit of rage, and so he went to the second floor to Judith's room and shot her in the head. Then, as the gunshot was going off, Maria started running down the hall towards Judith's room to check on her, and then Joseph shoots Maria as she's running down the hallway. They assume that this is the case because where the bodies were left, she was left in the hallway, and it looks like she kind of like face planted like forward, and then Judith was killed in her room. That's where her body was found. And then they assume that after a day or two, he eventually soaks their bodies in gasoline, sets the house on fire, and then he went to the garage and shot himself. So that is kind of like the whole thing of her death. Like, it's like I said, it's a very short story. Like it took me less than 5 minutes to talk about it, but it's so frustrating because the amount of times that the neighbors called CPS and the police because they would overhear him yelling and abusing them verbally and emotionally, like, from their houses. So they called multiple times, and she even got a separate apartment for them, but she never left, and she didn't let the police and CPS, take them away and protect them or anything. So to me, like I said, like, it's hard when you're in that situation, but I can't ever imagine myself like knowing that he's a super angry person and how abusive he was, to just not charge him at all.
Yeah, definitely like one of those things where it's like you kind of look and you're like, how do people not, proceed with further charges or, get out of those situations? But like it's easier obviously said than done, and she might have worried that, he might have done something worse sooner if she did leave or press charges. So you never know.
Yeah,
I mean, the justice system's pretty flawed, so it's not ideal, but definitely should have got out earlier. But
yeah,
there's
and
really
like,
not much she probably could have done different that would have changed the outcome. Because if
yeah,
someone's super determined to do something, they're gonna do it. They're gonna find a way. So
yeah, like, it was a very short case, and like that's the only thing he's ever done, and is he definitely has like a paranoid disorder, like. But I was just like, I wanted to cover it even though it was small. Like, it's so crazy that this little girl who did everything for her family, like, her all of her money was used for the bills, like, her money is the one that bought them the house and everything like that, and like, he just killed her. Like, he killed his source of income. and it was just like all because he thought that they were gonna leave and stuff. And I just it's just so sad that like she had like such a good little career going, and he took that away from her. It's just another case of, like I was talking about last week with Terry Driver, where he felt like he needed to have all the power since Judith had most of the power with her like her paying for everything. He just like wanted to have the power of being able to take somebody's life away. Basically, if I can't have you, nobody else can, and killing everyone. And the only problem I have with the police's interpretation on what could have happened is that they say that he probably killed them on July 25th or 26th, but I was just like, so he sat in the house for a day or two before realizing, oh, I need to kill myself too.
Yeah.
Like, those bodies, like, would it, like, because obviously they're not preserved, they're not in ice or anything. He just left them where he shot them, which means that they would have started decomposing, like, super quickly. Like,
Yeah, and like rigor mortis would have set in and
and
everything else.
it's July in Los Angeles, like, so it would be really, really warm.
Yeah.
And like, I thought that when I did the research the first time, I thought that he killed himself with CO2, but I guess it said that he shot himself. I thought he like suffocated himself with carbon monoxide poisoning. Hey, I must have got it confused with something else. It's just a sad case because like we said at the beginning, like I loved Land Before Time series. Like I think it's such a cute like kids movie series, and like there's like 4 or 5 films for it, and she was a cute little girl too. Like it was just so sad, but yeah, I
And we
know.
are actually coming up on the 35th anniversary here in a couple of days from this recording. That she's like 35th anniversary of their murder.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true. In a couple days here, yeah, because it's July 23rd and we're filming this now. Anytime a child, like anytime anyone dies, it's sad, but especially a child who didn't even get to live, to see her sweet 16. She didn't get to get her driver's license. She didn't she didn't even get to go to high school. Like it's just so sad.
She missed out, on so many things, and having her own family and you know career and everything else. So I think that's kind of today's theme.
Yeah,
So
definitely cases involving children today for sure, cuz yours is about 2 children as well, right?
yeah. So all right. So today I'm gonna cover the murder of James Bulger. So James Patrick Bulger was born March 16th of 1990. He was a 2-year-old from Kirkby, Merseyside, England, who would later be abducted, tortured, and murdered. He was murdered by two 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson, born August 23rd of 1982, and John Venables, born August 13th of 1982. Robert and John lured Bulger away from the New Strand Shopping Center in Boodle after his mom took an eye off Bulger for a moment while she paid for their items at the store. So they had CCTV footage at the time. So it would have been like early eras of the camera, so the like camera quality wasn't great. But on February 12th of 1993, they have CCTV image of Thompson and Venables watching children appearing to look for a target to take. The boys were skipping school, which was a regular occurrence for them. They didn't attend school too often. Throughout the day, they had been observed taking various items from different stores throughout the shopping center, including things like sweets, batteries, dolls, and a can of blue Humbrol modeling paint.
Is this in the UK?
Yeah, this is in England, is
Okay.
where this story took in Merseyside, England.
Okay.
Um, One of the boys later mentioned that they had been planning on abducting a child and leading them to a nearby busy road that ran beside the shopping center and pushed them into oncoming traffic. So their intentions when scoping out the mall were to take a child and to throw them in traffic.
Oh my
Um,
god.
we have to remember that, these are 10-year-old boys. Like, they should have been at school, but also to have that kind of intent at 10 is kind of crazy.
I remember at 10 years old, I was like deciding on things where, like, with Minecraft, whether I want to build a house out of wood or out of stone. Like, that's so crazy that, like, that's what I was thinking about at 10, and these
Yeah.
kids were thinking about, taking a poor child that's younger than them and doesn't know any better and throwing them into traffic just for no reason.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember at 10, like, us riding, me and my brother had dirt bikes growing up, and we were riding those around the yard or driving our skidoos or playing hockey or at sports. Like, we weren't, never in a million years did anything like that cross our mind, and still to this day, it has not.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that same day, Bulger and his mom, Denise, were inside of AR Tim's butcher shop on the lower floor of the center around 3:40 in the afternoon. She had just let go of his hand to pay for their items shortly after she noticed that he was missing. Thompson and Venables had approached James and took him by hand and led him outside the shopping center. And there's CCTV footage timestamped with 3:42 of James holding hands with Thompson and Venables walking outside of the shopping center. They took him to Leeds and Liverpool Canal, which is located about a quarter mile or 400 meters from the shopping center. They then picked up James and dropped him on his head, which he suffered injuries to his face. They had joked about pushing him into a canal and leaving him in the canal. There was an eyewitness to this and mentioned that they saw the boy at the canal, Bulger, crying his eyes out. The boys then took him on a 2.5 mile, 4 kilometer walk across Liverpool. They were witnessed by roughly about 38 people, but most did nothing to intervene.
I mean, like, even now, like, if I saw a 10-year-old child walking with a younger child, my first thought is, oh, maybe he's watching after a younger brother or a younger cousin. Like, I wouldn't immediately think, like, oh, this little child, this 10-year-old child, because, like, Kyle now is 9. Like, I can't imagine, like, me thinking, seeing Kyle walking with someone who's, like, a child who's, like, 6, and, like, I would just assume that he knew him. Like, I would never assume that he stole him.
Yeah, so that's kind of like what happened. So there was only two people that challenged Thompson and Venables, but they either told the person that it was their little brother or that he was lost and they were taking him to a police station. Um, at one point, like during their excursion, they went into a pet store, which they got kicked out. It doesn't really specify why they got kicked out of the pet store, but they were asked to leave and they did leave. The boys eventually made it to a town named Walton. I guess wherever they entered, there was a police station right across the road. They hesitated and chose instead to lead James up a steep bank to a railway line near the former Walton and Anfield railway station, which is really close to the Walton Park Cemetery. That's where one of the boys threw blue paint that they had shoplifted earlier in the day into Bulger's eye. They kicked him and stomped him and threw bricks and stones at him. They placed the stolen batteries from earlier in the day as well into his mouth. It's also rumored that they may have also inserted batteries into his anus, although there were no batteries located in his anus. Finally, the boys dropped a 22-pound railway fish plate, so like a railway bar, on Bulger, which led to Bulger sustaining 10 skull fractures as a result of the bar striking his head, which is
Um,
crazy to me that 10-year-old boys are able to lift that much and inflict that much pain onto somebody,
yeah, how
especially a 2-year-old.
Oh, he's 2. Okay, I was just about to ask that.
Yeah.
That is crazy. So wait, they dropped him on his head, threw stones and pebbles at him,
Yeah,
threw
so they,
paint in
they
his
dropped
eye.
him they dropped him on his head like before they even made it to Walton, so that was initially pretty much shortly after they took him out of the mall, out of the shopping center, and then they walked another 2.5 miles after that before they further, threw paint on him, stomped, kicked him, and like brutally assaulted him
Oh my
and threw
god.
paint in his eyes. So yeah, so they struck his head and then they put his body on the railroad track. They were not sure if he was deceased or not, and they weighed down his head by putting stones, debris, and anything they could to keep him on the railway tracks. And so they wanted, their plan was that a train would hit him and that his death would be ruled an accident, kind of like he wandered onto the train track and got hit and stuff. So that was their plan to kind of cover up their brutal murder and assault of James. They left the scene shortly after they put him on the tracks, and his body was severed by a train that did run over him.
Oh my god.
His body was located 2 days later by a group of children. Forensic pathologists were able to deem that he had been deceased before he was struck by the train, which obviously is good because I could not imagine. Pathologists also stated that he had suffered so many injuries, 42 in total, that they were never able to determine which of the injuries was the fatal blow. So they were not able to determine a cause of death because he was so severely beaten and mutilated that there was no way possible for them to identify his cause of death.
Wow, so they could have been beating him even when he was already dead, and they just kept doing it.
Yeah, so he was obviously deceased before they put him on the railroad tracks, but they did not know. They were not aware that he was,
Well,
and
yeah,
I
because
don't think
then
that they
they
were
wouldn't have put all
obviously.
that stuff on him then.
Well, yeah, they probably wouldn't, but they wanted it to look like it was an accident, so probably would have done anything to really kind of show that. So police also suspect that they had sexually assaulted Bulger because his shoes, socks, trousers, pants, and underwear had been removed, so he was nude from the waist down. Also, the pathologist reported that uh, Bulger's foreskin was forcibly pulled back. So I guess there was injuries kind of lining up with having been sexually assaulted.
Oh my god.
When the boys were questioned about that aspect of the attack by detectives and the child psychiatrist Eileen Vizard, the pair did not want to give details on that aspect of the case. They were arrested and charged after they released the photo of the CCTV image to the public. They were able to enhance it a little bit to get better clarity on the image, but the initial reports from the press indicated that they were thought to be teenagers walking with Bulger. But it wasn't until a lady recognized them on the CCTV image, indicating that she had seen them skipping school earlier that day, and she was able to identify both of them as Thompson and Venables, which was the big break in the case because the police had no idea who the two in the footage were, because in the footage their backs were to um, the camera, but the lady was able to identify them based on clothing and things like that, and having seen them at the shopping center earlier that day, and said they often skipped school together. So it wasn't out of the ordinary for them to be at the mall on a day where they should have been at school. So they were arrested and charged on February 20th of 1993. They were charged with abduction and murder. They were found guilty on November 24th, thus making them the youngest convicted murderers in the 20th century. They were initially sentenced to an indefinite sentence at Her Majesty's pleasure and remained in custody until a parole board decision in June of 2001. In June of 2001 recommended their release on a lifelong license at the age of 18. So they were basically released on a lifelong parole, so they'll be on parole until they inevitably pass away, which is crazy that they only served 8 years. And they had both just turned 11 when they were found guilty,
Wow.
which is absolutely crazy. So,
I'm,
um,
I am surprised that they only got 8, seeing as they like literally admitted saying that, oh yeah, like we were there waiting for someone so that we could waiting for a child that we would beat and throw in traffic. Like I'm surprised that knowing that information, knowing that it was premeditated like that they'd only get 8.
yeah. So there's just so much too, and like the murder charge obviously was in relation to James Bulger, sorry. The abduction case that they were charged with had no relations to the James Bulger case. It was actually related to, obviously they denied the charges of murder and abduction and attempted abduction. The abduction charge were related to another incident also the same day of Bulger's death on February 12th of 1993. They tried to lure another 2-year-old boy, but had been prevented by the boy's mother. So they were evidently looking for a young child to beat and abuse and essentially torture, um, which is crazy.
So they tried to
Again,
do
like we're
another
talking
one?
about 10-year-old boys. Yeah, so that morning they had tried to lure another 2-year-old boy, but the mother had seen them and was able to prevent her 2-year-old from being abducted by these two kids.
Wow.
So
That just shows like how much they wanted to kill a child.
yeah, so you can see like how much premeditation went into this, which is crazy to think that there's this much premeditation at for 10-year-old boys, you know,
Yeah.
which is
It's
crazy.
that is really nuts.
Yeah. So and then they were able to determine that it was them based obviously on that woman who was able to identify them. But also when they arrested them, they determined that both of the boys had the same blue paint on their clothing that Bulger had in his eye. Thompson and Venables both had blood on their shoes. Thompson's shoes were tested and came back as a match for Bulger's blood. There was a bruising pattern on uh, James Bulger's cheek, which was consistent with the upper shoe print that Thompson wore, which is crazy to have bruising in the imprint of a shoe. It just shows you the sheer stomping that, happened for the bruise to be in the shape of their shoe print that's on, the
Yeah.
shoe tread, which is crazy. The violence that was inflicted on this child.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was possible. Like I know like when you slap if you like 5-star slap somebody, like you can see the outline of the fingers and stuff, but like to actually get like an imprint of the shoe, the bottom of the shoe design is crazy.
Like yeah, so his bruises were in the shape and the pattern that was on Thompson's shoes.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and then they located paint also on Venable's shoes, which indicated that he used some force when kicking Bulger. Thompson was rumored to have asked police if Bulger was taken to a hospital to quote get him alive again. So Thompson did show some remorse, but obviously to inflict that much, like there's not really much you can do, especially when we're talking a 2-year-old. Yeah, they were remanded in custody to await the trial proceedings. In the trial, they were referred to as Child A and Child B. They were held in secure units until they were sentenced. Because of their age, they wanted it to be like a fair trial and everything, so they only referred to them as Child A and B. There was over 500 protesters gathered at the court during the initial court appearances. Like the parents of the kids were actually moved to different parts of the country and given new identities because they faced death threats from vigilantes. So they actually never even got to go to the trial or like be at the trial or anything because people were threatening them
Like
um,
they're threatening the
because of
family
what they're.
members?
Yeah, so they
Oh my
basically like
god.
John Venables and Robert Thompson, like their families were sent death threats and stuff. Even though obviously they had no part in the the killings, but their families were at risk, so they had to be given new identities and moved to a new location within the country to be hidden and kind of live in secrecy.
That's
Um,
horrible. It just reminds me of the case last episode where I talked about Terry Driver's wife Val. Like she was completely shunned by everybody, and like it's just like it's not the family's fault always for this happening. Like if they're not a part of it, like no parent ever like would think that their child would, you know, at 10 years old think about murdering a 2-year-old. Like no parent like really thinks that. So like
or being capable of.
yeah, like that's so crazy to me.
Excuse me. So yeah, so they were given new identities, and November 1st of 1993, they were charged as adults. Imagine being 10 and being charged as adults. Is a pretty rare case. The two boys had to sit on raised chairs in the courtroom, in the dock where the criminals usually sit, because it's designed for adults, not for children. So they had to sit on raised chairs so they could see over the edge because of how young they were and how small they were. They were accompanied by two social workers and guards. Although they were separate from their parents, they were in touching distance with other family members who attended the trial. The whole case was criticized by the European Court of Human Rights, which claimed in 1999 that they had not received a fair trial by being tried in public in an adult court. The trial led the lead prosecution counsel, Richard Henry, successfully rebutted the principles of Dolly Incapax, which presumes that young children cannot be held legally responsible for their actions.
I find that really stupid because like uh I understand like people thinking not it's a fair trial because like even though they said child A and child B, they should have said person A, person B, in my opinion. Just to like because since it was tried as an adult crime, because murder to me is always going to be an adult crime. Like that's just because it's huge in its proportions. But every child knows if they do something bad, they're going to get punished for it. If they steal a chocolate bar, they're going to get punished for it. If they do this, if they're talking in class when they're not supposed to, they get punished for it by going to detention. If they, you know, like so they understand like they're not 6 years old, they're 10 years old. They understand the process of doing something they're not supposed to and getting in trouble for it. And like so they people shouldn't say that they don't understand their actions because they're children. Like there's a reason why children get tried as adults for such dangerous cases
Famous
such as this,
crimes.
right? Like
Yeah.
they literally went to a mall, skipped school, went to a mall to purposely get a child and kill them. That was their exact thought process.
Yeah. They intentionally were seeking a victim. Um, Obviously, like what they ended up doing is not what they had planned, but their plan was to throw some kid into traffic. Obviously, getting struck is probably going to end their life as well. So, they went out with the intentions of harming people, which is just crazy to think at 10 years old that that's, premeditated and that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, like I just like I can't help but like look back to when I was 10. You know, like I never even thought about like anything that even like I never went out of my way to hurt someone's feelings, never went out of my way to, harm other people. I was just too focused on, you know, who am I going to hang out with today? Like what do I want
What
to
am
build
I
my
eating?
Minecraft house out of? What Pokemon card am I looking for next for my collection? And then also the do you remember Silly Bands?
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to collect as many silly bands as you could, and trying to beat that person who has a million always on their wrist all the way up to their forearm. Like
Yes.
that's what I was focusing on at 10 years old. Like, and for them to literally skip school and be like, and one of them had to be like, you know what, let's go kill a kid today, or I want to hurt someone today, and the other one's like, oh yeah, I'm totally down. Like for both
Yeah.
of them to be like completely down for that. And like I know that you said that the one child like asked if he was ended up taken to the hospital and like brung back to life or whatever, but it's that makes me assume that the child who didn't ask was probably the person who uh initially probably suggested, hey, let's go hurt a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, so child psychiatrist Eileen Vizard, who had interviewed Thompson before the trial, she was asked in court if he would know the difference between right and wrong, and that it was wrong to take a child away from his mother, and that it was wrong to cause injury to a child. Vizard replied with, "If the issue is on the balance of probabilities, I think I can answer with certainty." She also said that Thompson was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder after the attack on Bulger, which is not surprising because of how heinous their attack was. And then Susan Bailey, so she was with the Home Office of Forensic Psychiatrists, who interviewed Venables, said unequivocally that he knew the difference between right and wrong. So they're both saying that based on talking to them and getting to kind of know them through their interview process, that they knew, right from wrong, even at, the young age of 10. So um, they deemed them like fit to stand trial, and they knew what they were doing by obviously all of their actions. Thompson and Venables didn't speak during the trial. The case was based to a large extent on over 20 hours of recorded police interviews, which they just played in court. So they never actually spoke in court. They just played the police tape recordings from their many interviews with the boys. They believed that Thompson was considered to have been the ringleader in the abduction process, although they believe that Venables had initiated the idea of taking Bulger to the railway line.
I'm surprised that they would.
Venables,
Actually surprised by that they thought that Thompson was kind of the one leading the charge here, because he seemed like, because you said Thompson was the one that ended up getting PTSD, right?
yeah. So Eileen Vizard is the one who said that he was suffering from PTSD, but a little bit later on that we'll find out that Venables is also suffering from PTSD. But they just believe that Thompson was the leader in the taking of
Taking
Bulger.
him. Okay.
And yeah, so we're kind of getting to that. So they believe Venables to have kind of initiated the idea of taking him to the railway and kind of assaulting him. Venables described Bulger as having his hand held and being picked up and held when they were meandering the streets and to the scene where Bulger would eventually be killed. Lawrence Lee, who was the solicitor of Venables during the trial, later said that Thompson was one of the most frightening children he had seen and compared him to the Pied Piper, which I'm not really sure who the Pied Piper is, so I'll definitely have to look into that.
The Pied Piper is a 13th century legend, um, who led away the rats from the town of Hamelin and then refused payment for his services. He led away 130 children and disappeared with them into the mountains. So basically, I saw a Once Upon a Time, the TV show. They had an episode where the Pied Piper would play like a harmonica, and it would like attract in the children to him, and then he would like walk away into the forest playing it, and they would follow him and then disappear forever. So basically, he led people away from the mountain, led children away from their village up to the mountains to never be seen again.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so anyways, after his court appearance, Venables would strip his clothing off, saying, "I can smell James like a baby smell." So he could just, after every court appearance, he would just smell what James smelled like, and he would always have to take off his clothes and put on different clothes so that in his mind he would stop smelling James on his clothing.
Wow.
The prosecution admitted a number of exhibits during the trial, including a box of 27 bricks, blood-stained stone, Bulger's underpants, and the rusty iron bar described as a railway fish plate. The pathologist spent 33 minutes outlining the injuries sustained by Bulger. Many of those to his legs, had been inflicted after he was stripped from the waist down. Brain damage was extensive and included a hemorrhage. The boys were 11 when they were found guilty of the murder, and again became the youngest convicted murders of the 20th century. The judge, Mr. Justice Moreland, told Thompson and Venables that they had, quote, committed a crime of unparalleled evil and barbarity. In my judgment, your conduct was both cunning and very wicked. Moreland sentenced them to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, with a recommendation to be detained in custody for, quote, very, very many years to come. Recommending a minimum 8-year term at the closing of the trial, the judge lifted the reporting restrictions and allowed the names of the killers to be released, saying, quote, I did this because the public interest overrode the interest of the defendants. There was a need for informed public debate on crimes committed by young children. Yeah, so that was pretty much the trial. After the trial, there was kind of like a lot of back and forth on whether they should serve a minimum of 10 years, which would have made them eligible for release, in February of 2003. They would have been 20 years old. There was a petition that got around 280,000 signatures in a bid to increase their time spent by both boys in custody. The campaign was successful, and they announced in July of 1994 that the boys would be kept in custody for a minimum of 15 years, meaning that they would not be considered for release until February 2008, at which time the boys would be 25 years old. However, it was later overturned in 1997 by the House of Lords that ruled it unlawful for the Home Secretary to decide minimum sentences for young offenders and deemed that it was an institutionalized vengeance against the offenders. European Court of Human Rights have since ruled that although Parliament may set the minimum and maximum terms for individual categories of crimes, it is the responsibility of the trial judge, with the benefit of all the evidence and arguments from both prosecution and defense, to determine the minimum term in individual criminal cases. So pretty much just they're just saying that the judge can, obviously only be the one who can make a decision. It's not up to other people to push for higher or lower sentences after the sentence has been handed out.
Yeah, well, I know that in the States, like, you can get like a governor or anyone who's kind of like elected into office, or like a chairman or anything like that, like they could petition for things to be dropped. So like that's how a lot of killers can get off death row and everything like that. But like for them to say that, like, oh, it's an attack of like vengeance against them, like these children decided that they wanted to harm a innocent little 2-year-old boy for fun. And I think that, like, it's, to me, I wouldn't see it as vengeance. I just think that like they should get more than 8 years, because like it was premeditated.
I don't disagree. I think 8 years is not enough. Life is not even enough for the the atrocities that they committed. After the trial, Thompson was held at the Barton Moss Secure Care Center in Manchester, where Venables was detained in Vardy House, a small 8-bedded unit at Red Bank Secure Unit in St. Helens on Merseyside. These locations were not publicly known until after they were released. They were taught to conceal their real names during their sentences, like during their the serving of their sentence, so that other inmates wouldn't like attack them or kind of go after them for what they did.
Yeah, because aren't child killers like one of the most hated people in prison systems?
Yeah, anybody who like harms a child or something is usually put in like what they call PC, so protective custody, because if other inmates find out what they did, and they're definitely going to be a target, because nobody likes anybody who harms children. So yeah, but I just don't know that in their case that too many people would have done anything, because we're talking being detained with other children. So
Right.
So I'm not really sure, but anyways, so their parents regularly visited them every 3 days. They received their education and rehabilitation despite initial problems. Venables was said to have eventually made good progress, resulting in him staying there for his full 8 years, despite the facility only being a short stay remand unit. Both were reported to suffer from post traumatic stress disorder. Venables, in particular, told of experiencing nightmares and flashbacks of the murder. In June 2001, after a 6-month review, the parole board ruled the boys were no longer a threat to public safety and could be released, as their minimum sentence had expired in February of 2001. Home Secretary David Blunkett approved the decision for their release, and they were released a few weeks later on a lifelong license, which is the term they use in England, which indicates that they'll be on parole for the rest of their life. After serving 8 years, it was reported that they would be giving new identities and move to secret locations under witness protection, under a witness protection kind of program that was supported by fabrication of passports, new insurance numbers, certificates, medical records, and then the Blunkett added his own conditions to their release, insisting that he's sent daily updates on their actions. Their terms of release included they were not allowed to contact each other or Bulger's family. They were prohibited from visiting Merseyside region. Curfews were imposed on them, and they had to report to probation officers. If they breached any rules or were deemed a risk to the public, they could be returned to prison. An injunction was imposed on the media after the trial, preventing publication of details about their whereabouts. Was kept in place following their release. Their injunction was granted. Blunkett said that their injunction was granted because there was a real and strong possibility that their lives would be at risk if their identities became known. Months after the trial, the Bulger family had given birth to their second son. However, it broke down the James's parents, and they ended up divorcing in 1995. That's pretty much the case. I do have kind of a bit of an update on John Venables. I wasn't able to find anything on Robert Thompson. Obviously, they are under new identities, but John Venables has since been in trouble, so we can kind of go into that a little bit if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious what other crimes he decided he wanted to commit. So since Robert there's not really any update on him, do you think that he tried to stay out of crime then?
Yeah, I think it seems that way. Like they were obviously given new identities, and he seems to have obviously stuck and been able to kind of conceal his identity as far as who he is, and possibly stayed out of trouble, or not really sure. But there's no report. Whereas John Venables was obviously also given a new identity, but there is definitely a lot of information on his later crimes. So it definitely seems like even if Thompson would have been in trouble, that it would have come to light when you look at his name, but nothing comes up for him. So I'm assuming he has kept his head clear since everything happened, but we can't confirm nor deny. There's just no information out there.
Okay. So what's going on with Venables?
All right. So shortly before his release, when he was 17, Venables was alleged to have had sex with a woman who worked at the secure unit that he was being held at.
Oh my god.
In April of 2011, in the aftermath, there was allegations that were outlined in a Sunday Times Magazine article written by David James Smith, who had been following the Bulger case since 1993, and again later in a BBC documentary titled John Venables, What Went Wrong. The female staff member was suspended for sexual misconduct, and she never returned to work at Red Bank.
Well, I
The
would
St.
hope
Helens.
not, seeing as she had sex with a minor.
Yeah, it doesn't mention how old she was, but obviously
But she's
still a
working
minor.
there, so
And
you would assume that she's
yeah,
an adult.
yeah, you would assume, but again, there's just no information on her. St. Helens Borough Council denied that the incident had been covered up, saying all allegations were thoroughly investigated by an independent team on the orders of the Home Office and chaired by Arthur de Frischling, a retired prison governor. Venables began living independently in March of 2002. Sometime thereafter, he began a relationship with a woman who had a 5-year-old child. It's not known whether he had already begun downloading child abuse images at the time of dating the woman, although he denies having ever met the child. In 2005, when Venables was 23, his probation officer met another one of his girlfriends who was aged 17. After a number of young girlfriends, he was presumed that he was having delayed adolescence as a result of obviously being in the prison system and not, growing up like a normal kid as a result of his actions. After a period of reduced supervision, he began excessively drinking and taking drugs, downloading child abuse images, as well as visiting Merseyside, which was a breach of his license. So he was rearrested and sent back to prison. In 2008, a new probation officer said that he spent a great deal of leisure time playing video games and on the internet. In September of that year, he was arrested on suspicion of a fray following a fight outside of a nightclub. He claimed he was acting in self-defense, and the charges were later dropped after he agreed to go on alcohol awareness course. 3 months later, he was found to be in possession of cocaine. He was subjected to a curfew on 2 occasions. He also revealed his true identity to a friend, which was also a breach. He told somebody that he was, in fact, John Venables. In March of 2010, the Ministry of Justice revealed that Venables returned to prison on an unspecified violation of the terms of his license as release, stating he had returned to prison because of extremely serious allegations, and stated that he was unable to give further details of the reason for his return to custody because it was not in the public interest to do so. On March 7th, media reports said he had been accused of child pornography offenses. In June of 2010, he was charged with possession, distribution of indecent images of children. It was alleged that he had downloaded 57 indecent images over a 12-month period from February of 2010 and allowed other people to access the files through a peer-to-peer network. He faced 2 charges under the Protection of Children Act 1978. The 23rd of July, he appeared in a court hearing via video conference that was only visible to the judges to protect his identity. He pleaded guilty to the charges of downloading and distributing child porn and was sentenced to 2 years in jail. At another court hearing, it emerged that he had posed in online chat rooms as a 35-year-old Donnie Smith, a married woman from Liverpool who boasted about abusing her 8-year-old daughter in hopes to obtain further child sexual abuse material, which is pretty messed up that he is now in his 20s, I guess it would be, and he's pretending to be this older woman online to hopefully get more,
Yeah, he's like
child porn material.
that is crazy. He's he was how old roughly?
2010. So, and I think they were born in like 82. So, like he was like in somewhere in his kind of 20s, roughly.
In 1993 he was 10. So then 2003 he'd be 20. So he'd be 25 when he was arrested for child pornography.
Yeah, which is absolutely crazy.
Which means that today he's 50.
Yeah, which is not that old.
Which means yeah, like he's younger than our parents, but like he's 10 years younger than.
He wouldn't be 50.
Because he was if he was born in 83, he wouldn't be 50.
82, 41.
He'd be 40.
Yeah,
40 or 41.
Yeah.
Like that's still like that he's only just a little bit older than Walter.
Yeah.
Which is nuts.
Just crazy. He would have been 27 when this happened.
This just makes me like believe that when they said they like suspected that he sexually assaulted James or whatever, like I believe that. because like
Yeah.
knowing what has happened like in his later life, even after he's been out of prison and stuff, like when he was on parole, like I have no doubt in my mind that
Yeah.
that's the case.
Yeah. So then in February of 2010, he had approached his probation officer fearing that his new identity had been compromised at his place of employment. Um, when an officer arrived to his place, Venables was observed attempting to remove and destroy a hard drive of his computer with a knife and a tin opener. The officer suspicions were aroused, and the computer was taken to be examined, leading to the discovery of child sexual abuse material, which included children as young as 2 being raped by adults and penetrative rape of 7 or 8-year-olds. He was again given his new identity, and they said the only way for him to stop doing what he's doing would be constant 24-hour surveillance, which, based on everything he's done, he should have always been in 24-hour surveillance since the initial crime. But clearly, that was not in their plans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't just like let them free and be like, oh yeah, by the way, you could, even though you murdered a little child and you knew what you were doing, here you go, here's some freedom. Just don't tell people who you are. But like, imagine marrying someone and then them randomly tell you one day, even though they're not supposed to because of court order, that they were a child who kidnapped and killed another child. I would have been
Yeah.
so distraught. Like I'd have been like, "Oh my god, like of course this is the person who I married," like oh my
Yeah.
god.
Yeah. So it was determined that he would remain in police custody, and they would check in again in a year's time about releasing him. Police provided him with a new identity, which is rare, but only done when the individual could be in serious danger. In his case, his photo was posted on a website that helps identify pedophiles, allegedly showing what he looked like as an adult and his name. In 2011, it was determined that he would remain in custody for the foreseeable future, as he would likely reveal his true identity again if released. July 4th of 2013, he was approved for release and was released September 3rd of 2013. In November of 2017, it was reported that he had been rearrested again for possession of child sexual abuse imagery. So he still has not learned anything from previous cases or ever. Doesn't seem like rehab's his thing, and changing his ways is not in his cards by the looks of it.
But that just shows like how, I wouldn't say charming, but how easily he could like almost like trick
Manipulative.
the rehabilitation system and into thinking that he was going to be okay, and he wasn't any time that he was released.
Yeah. He was charged with unspecified offenses relating to indecent images of children, and on the 7th of February, he pleaded guilty to possession of indecent images of children for a second time. He pleaded guilty via video link to 3 charges of making indecent images of children and one of possessing a pedophile manual that included advice for would-be child molesters, including instructions on child grooming and evading detection. He admitted being in possession of 392 Category A, 148 Category B, and 630 Category C child pornography images, and was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison, which not long enough. In September of 2020, he was denied parole. He was scheduled for another parole meeting in October 2022, but it was postponed for at least 3 months.
Yeah, no, he doesn't get to go out again. Like, no, it's not third time's the
Yes,
charm. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So then there was also, so I'm not sure if he's out currently. That was like the last update that I was able to find on him. And then I do have just a few other things about Bulger's parents and some other information on the case.
okay.
So on March 4th of 2019, Bulger's father, Ralph, lost a legal challenge to lift the lifelong order protecting Venable's anonymity. Judge Andrew McFarland turned down the request, saying that the uniquely notorious nature of the case meant there is a strong possibility, if not a probability, that if his identity were known, that he would be pursued, resulting in grave and potentially fatal consequences,
Which I
I'm
believe that
not
would probably happen.
which I'm not saying people deserve to die, but I mean, if you've done what he's done, you definitely deserve to be in jail for your entire life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that they
Um,
should have to
should
write it
never be
out
walking
for
free.
sure.
Yeah. Um, and then in late June of 2019, it was reported that British officials had considered resettling Venables in Canada, Australia, or New Zealand due to the high cost behind protecting Venables' anonymity. British authorities had reportedly spent 65,000 euros in legal fees to keep Venables' identity a secret. In response to media coverage, Prime Minister Ardern remarked that due to his criminal history, Venables would need an exemption under New Zealand's Immigration Act 2009 and that he should not bother applying. So New Zealand was like, nope, you are not sending him to us. We do not want him. So that's like pretty much the last update, really. But as of 2022, October of 2022, he was still in custody and would be till early 2023. But again, there is no mention of if he is still in custody to this day or if he is a free man walking amongst us.
That is crazy that like the next person or the next man that I meet could be one of them. Like obviously like because we don't know where they are now, especially Robert Thompson, like that it could be anyone. Like he could have moved to a
Yeah,
different country on an exemption that we just never knew about. Like but I understand like them wanting to send him somewhere where people aren't as well known about the case because like anyone who knows what he looks like on the internet can easily like if you walk past him now I'd be like, oh my god, that's freaking him. Like I'm gonna stay as far away as possible. Like so I get it,
yeah.
but you shouldn't
I mean,
unload your problems onto another country either. So like I kind of give kudos to New Zealand for that.
yeah, I can't see a country saying, you know what, yeah, we'll take them. Like, especially with there's so many other minor offenses that I know that, you know, prevent a lot of people from crossing the border. So I just cannot see Canada allowing him to come to Canada. Like I just can't imagine that happening. But then again, who knows? But the only thing I found with Thompson was he is suspected to still be in the UK. But there's nothing else really.
Yeah, I when you said that you were gonna cover this case, that you were gonna cover this case, I was like, you know, I don't even recognize those names, but as soon as you started like telling the story, I'm like, oh, I've definitely heard this. Um, it is such a wild case. I just like it still blows my mind that a 10-year-old is thinking about hurting somebody, like, and for them to like say that Thompson was probably the ringleader, and then know that Venables is still doing all this stuff too. Like I'm I'm almost like it's hard for me to believe that Venables could be the leader. He wouldn't be the leader. In hurting this child when they were younger
Yeah, considering I mean he's still actively, committing crimes against children,
and
um,
fantasizing about hurting them.
and creating it. So he's creating it and putting it out there for people to see, which obviously is on every level possible. But yeah, it's hard to believe that they don't deem him to be the ringleader on that, considering his continued criminality. But I mean, I guess I don't know.
I mean, the only way I could
I don't even
see
know what to say.
the only way that I would be able to believe that Thompson was the ringleader is if they meant it in purpose of like only to take a child, not necessarily to hurt the child or to like to assault the child. Like that's the only way that I personally like, unless there was more information that came out about it, like that is the only way I could believe that Thompson was could be considered like the leader of what happened that day.
Yeah, so I mean, even to like be able to be around children after everything, I think is pretty crazy to me that there's been no, like, there's been nothing in his thing saying that he has to stay away from children, even though pretty much every crime except for the drunken brawl involved um, the hurting of children
Yeah, and
is
I thought that if
crazy to
somebody
me.
gets charged with anything like pedophilia wise, that they weren't allowed to be within a certain distance of children. I thought that was like a automatic like thing. If like you're technically on a sex offender list, like you can't. Or is it because it was just like images and it wasn't him actually assaulting people?
So I'm not um, entirely sure on that. Um, I know if there is like an assault involving a children, like a child, I think it really depends on your charges and like the conditions of your release. Obviously, you would always be on the registry, but yeah, I don't know how that works, to be completely honest with you. Definitely something to kind of look into because now I'm curious. But yeah, I know for like some people, like they might have like a condition to avoid places like that for like say, a few years till their probation or parole is over. Some might be, for a much longer.
Yeah, because
Um,
I thought that it was just like if you're on the sex offender list or anything like that, or you're labeled as like a dangerous child offender or something, that like you couldn't get within, like 50 feet of a school. You're not allowed like uh to be alone one on one with a child or anything like that.
yeah, I don't think you're allowed, obviously, one on one. I mean, that would definitely violate. But yeah, again, I'm not really sure how that works as far as that goes. So definitely something to look into because now
Yeah,
I'm curious on what the what the status is, and I think every country would be different, right? Like every country's rules are pretty drastically different.
that's true.
Um, like I've never heard of a case of people being on parole or probation for the entirety of their life based on one case. Usually, it's 3 to 10 years typically in either Canada or the States. But to be on parole or probation for the rest of your life is kind of crazy. I've never heard of that one before, and especially handed to 10-year-olds, well, 18 when they get out of prison. But yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely unheard of. So
yeah, I never heard of it either. I was like, when you said it, I was like, I have never heard of like anyone. Yet again, like I don't really know much about parole. It's not like I learned about like I know that you have a contract you have to follow, and if you violate it, you have to go back to jail and stuff like that. Like I understand that because I understand like bail bonds people and stuff like that too when people go out on bond. But like I like you said, like I've never heard of anyone being like said like, yeah, you don't have to be in prison, but there's a set of rules you have to face for the rest of your life. And like even like not being able to tell people who you truly are, like for the rest of your life.
yeah, I mean, those are especially like obviously to protect them from being harmed by other people. But I've heard of that one before. But yeah, again, lifelong probation slash parole um, is pretty crazy to me.
Yeah, I like it's wild. It's a very wild case. Like I'm not surprised that because you said you covered this case a lot, like in school, right?
Yeah, this is a case that we had talked about a bit, not crazy amount, but we definitely kind of went through a lot of historic cases and kind of talked about setting precedents and things like that. So definitely something that we talked about. But
Yeah,
we covered a lot of cases in school. I mean, that's
that's
what
fair.
policing is about, right? So
it
um,
kind of it kind of helps when you cover real life cases instead of just like random mock cases, right? So
yeah, yeah, for sure. I think it pretty much covers a lot of it for this case. This case is a pretty large one, so there's definitely some details that just kind of got omitted because we could be here for hours covering a bunch of details on this. But I definitely think that's everything for today. Everything we're gonna cover on that case.
that's true. If we ever find out any like further updates about where they could be now, if either of them get arrested, again, or anything like that, like we can easily just pop it into the beginning of another episode to be like, just before we get into it, as an update on this case, saying this, and like, because I love to be like figuring out all these like updates and stuff, and I think that other people would be very interested in that too.
Yeah, for sure. If there's any further development, we'll definitely update you guys. But as of right now, there's no further updates on their whereabouts or their status anywhere.
Like it was a very wild case, and I'm glad that you covered it, because that was a doozy, and I really enjoyed listening to your story for sure. We will catch you in the next one. It will also be a fun case for me to cover.
If you would ever like to get in contact with us, you can DM us on Instagram at worstcasemacchiato, or you can send us an email at worstcasemacchiato@gmail.com. You can let us know about any updates on cases, or if you think that we accidentally got some information wrong, just let us know. We can look into it and then address it in the next episode. Or if you just want to email us to talk about a personal experience with a specific case, or to suggest a case that we should cover in the future, just let us know on either Instagram or by emailing us, and we will get around to answering everybody that we can. As always, we'll see you in the next one.